Hey everyone, and welcome back to another roundup. So, the ESRB have got people quite pissed. Then Valorant's anti-cheat system is causing issues for players and Riot alike that are insane. There are performance issues, even in other games, and what looks like constant PC root access, even when you don't have Valorant open. It's a bit wild. Then for Capcom, seems like they're going all in on their remasters, but even with a veteran dev team, the most resources ever put into one of their remasters, does RE4 even need a remake? And then finally for our main leads, Animal Crossing New Horizons is causing a stir in China because, you know what, sometimes people expressing themselves can be a little bit troubling for the people in power, plus a whole bunch of other stories. First though, patrons, a big thank you to you guys. 3 things. Number 1, the daily briefing. Our team goes through all the news, and that briefing gives you all you need to know boiled down into one place. Then 2, Fantasy Loot Month. You'll get a big bunch of stuff straight from our game development team to your mailbox. And then 3, there are the weeklies. Right now, V1 is kind of like a weekly wrap-up, but stay tuned as we work to add more features and things like that to the weekly post. So yeah, all that in the Patreon. Thank you to them for aiding us. Ad revenue has halved. It's been really it's been a problem recently, but you guys have really came in and helped us out. So cheers. And with that, let's get into the news. First up, the ESRB story, and I've got to be real with you, this is being covered in a really silly way that's not particularly effective. Yeah, like, look, we've got to live in the real world here, and that's why I think you're going to see a bit of a different approach to this one. First of all, to be very clear, I do not like loot boxes and stuff in games, and I do think that whether they, technically speaking, fulfill a legal definition of gambling or not, I think they absolutely do prey psychologically upon people in the same way that gambling does. So, with that said, what has happened? Well, there is a new label that will say that a game contains in-game purchases, and then it's like got brackets, randomized items, okay? Now, there are 2 reasons why people primarily are pissed off at this. Reason number 1, well, a lot of people are just like, it's a loot box, call it a loot box, not a randomized item. Then reason number 2 is that a lot of people would rather it just says contains gambling. Now, this is the bit where we've got to live in the real world and we've got to be realistic about things. The ESRB cannot call it gambling because in, at least in the USA, it's technically not gambling, right? Like, I think it may as well be gambling, but from a legal perspective, it's not gambling. Now, the reason there is that typically speaking, for something to be classed as gambling, you've got to be able to cash out. Now, my personal belief is that that's a very rigid definition, and yeah, sure, you can't cash out USD or some local currency, but you do cash out with something that, is of value to you, right? And that's what actually leads to a gambling-like behavior pattern. Well, basically, no, a gambling behavior pattern happening. But the thing is, that's not the legal definition. So to expect the ESRB to say contains gambling is to expect them to suddenly become an activist organization that's trying to push for political change in that way. I mean, they do push for political change, but I mean, in other areas, but yeah, this would be expecting them to do that, which, I mean, fair enough if you want that expectation, but realistically, the way that has worked in the past in other countries, and the actual sort of thing we should be doing here is, yeah, you should be contacting if you're in the US, right, I'm not, but if you are, you should be contacting your senator, right, your local politicians, and trying to get them to advocate for changing the legal definition of gambling, because once that legal definition of gambling changes, then maybe your FIFA Ultimate Team will fall under that, and then the ESRB's label will be able to say gambling, right? So you get my point there. Basically, to go to the ESRB is basically completely pointless, and to expect them to say gambling when they don't need to is just completely unrealistic. Instead, what you want to do is you want to work that through the legal system and change the legal definition so that it would constitute gambling, right? So that's what's going on there. Now, the other thing, right, loot boxes, to us as gamers, we know what that is, right? It's like a synonym for gambling, essentially, for us and how we view that. But the thing is, as they say in their blog post, like 1/3 of the parents that they talked to sort of knew what a loot box was, the rest didn't. That's a bit of a problem. And then even for people who do know what a loot box, you could imagine a parent being like, well, what's the difference between a loot box and a card pack? Thinking about, say, Overwatch and FIFA Ultimate Team. Even though to us, gamers, it's like, well, they're the same thing, basically. It doesn't matter if it's, a fake pack or a fake box. But that sort of thing would be confusing to parents who are technologically a little bit illiterate, right? Especially when it comes to game industry specific things. Therefore, what are all of these things? Well, they are in-game purchases with randomized items. So that is why they're not using the word loot box. I think it seems that saying randomized items for the vast majority of actual parents, who are really who these labels are meant for, would have a higher hit rate, lead to a higher understanding, and therefore be more effective at communicating what it is supposed to do. So there you go. I think that, the ESRB are pretty fallible, and sometimes they do tick me off. In this situation, I think that, I think there's a really good reason to be pissed off, right? And that is at the business practices of the games industry. But I don't think that having a label suddenly say, gambling is a realistic thing to be asking for when it's not the legal definition. And if you want actual change there, you've got to work on pushing the legal definition. That is why Belgium, as an example, did what it did, and why FIFA Ultimate Team is not really a thing in Belgium the same way that it is in other places. So if you want those US states to be categorizing it as gambling, you've got to write to your politicians, basically. So there you go. That is my take on that story. Hopefully one that's just a little bit more in the real world. Like, I just saw some, I guess, needless or I guess unhelpful anger on this one, I suppose. So yeah, anyway, that's that story. Let me know. Let's move on. So Riot are not being good at all. They spent the weekend fielding some awkward questions over Valorant's new anti-cheat software. Basically, right, several people have reported issues with the new Vanguard software that ships with Valorant and is its anti-cheat. And this ranges from frame drops in other games to general computer performance issues. Yes, general issues. That is really bad. I mean, general computer problems, like... Now, the biggest complaint so far, though, is that the software starts when you boot your computer, and then it runs all the time. Hence, those general computer problems and frame drops in other games. Now, other similar software like Backlash or Easy Anti-Cheat, they only load once you actually, open the game, and then they go away once you close the game. And this was confirmed as an intended behavior by Riot, which obviously has got a lot of people concerned, and rightly so. Funny enough, yes, nobody's that happy about a piece of software running continuously on their computer, especially when there's performance issues, and especially one that does have elevated privileges. Now, there are ways to disable it, but it is pretty much absurd that it's sort of people's responsibility to develop a workaround for this massively, massively overbearing anti-cheat system. I mean, hey, like, a system like that so overbearing, yeah, it's totally in line with Riot's completely control freakish nature. Now, more generally, right, there were reports of Vanguard severely impacting performance in other games. There was, like, loads of Reddit posts, people saying they were getting frame drops in Borderlands 3 or in Modern Warfare, stuff like that, which is the type of absurd thing that would be happening if this was causing problems and was just open pretty much all the time. Now, we are still waiting an official, statement from Riot on these matters. The closest we've gotten to all that, though, as a response, is to a Reddit thread that was discussing FPS drops, and that being deleted. Yes, deleted by the mods. Now, look, if you know what happens if you say the horrid, cursed words Richard Lewis on a Riot subreddit, well, your post goes bye-bye. Basically, right, the mods on, the League of Legends sub are basically, they're a laughingstock. They're widely known for being absurd. They get early access to Riot stuff. They basically are, I'm going to say it, they're complete corporate shills. Which is quite funny, because if you look at, say, the harassment and genuine terrible things that have happened at Riot, God, if you're going to shill for a company, come on, not that one. So, yeah, a bit of an absurd situation. And as much as I do command, a really strong stance against anti-cheat, and what Riot do with Riot First so they can, get good network performance, yeah, stuff like this is ridiculous. They need to remove it immediately. That basically is the situation. Then next up, a funny little thing for Fallout 76. So, the Wastelanders update is about to come out. It brings with it the NPCs and all of that stuff, but there's a little bit of a problem because those NPCs have got to go somewhere, and that somewhere could be where your camp is, which basically now means that you will need to move your camp if it is in one of those places, and Bethesda provided a map. So it's a bit of a funny situation. Now, they aren't letting you move the camp for free and all of that stuff. It's quite funny, they did get a little bit of flack from this, and you could see it as them not really pre-planning, but at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that 76, it would be better, right, if it had those NPCs and all of that stuff, and it was actually good, and if having to move a few camps is the cost for that, I think that is just fine. Ultimately, this is a very, very funny game to laugh at. It absolutely is. But there's a lot of people who like Fallout. okay? They like Fallout, they like 3, they like New Vegas, they just want some good new Fallout content. So because of that, I do hope that Wastelanders is good. I do hope that it improves the game, and I do hope that the people who want some narrative content from their Fallout game actually get that. I suppose in that case, yeah, having to move the camps is unfortunate, but at the end of the day, I think rather understandable as a solution to a pretty obvious problem. Now that said, I would also say none of this should have been an issue in the first place. This game should have shipped with NPCs. What they did is they released a minimum viable product. It went out too quickly, it was full of bugs, it was not well designed. They should have just waited the extra year or two, got those NPCs in, and actually released a good game, instead of this rather stupid rigmarole we've had for nearly a year and a half or whatever now. So, there you go, Fallout 76 update. With that, let's move on. So I'm just going to do a quick one where basically rumors are saying that the Resident Evil 4 remake led by M2 is a thing that is now being greenlit. Now basically, right, M2 are going to be leading that game. They've been preparing for it since 2018. It's said to be releasing in 2022, and the original game director is not on it technically, but is providing informal advice for the development. Now for me, it's an interesting situation, right, because if they've been prepping, right, since 2018, they're only in full production now, and then it's coming out in 2022, I've got to wonder, how much more are they planning to put into this, right? Like, is that something that they want to make like a mini, Final Fantasy VII remake where it really is a big change? Now on that, I always have to wonder, are you risking ruining gold there? Right? Like, that's a bit worrying. And also Resident Evil 4. It has been ported, it has had its remasters, it's had all of those things, so you've got to wonder, why is this needed? Perhaps Capcom also wondered the same thing, and maybe that's why this is getting the most resources that any of their remakes have got. And in terms of that, like, the Resi 2 one, I think it was 6.5 million sales. The Resi 3 one's already got 2 million sales. This is clearly a winning formula for them. Of course, they're just going to have a bit of a problem where once they're done with RE4, then the sort of really good ones that people universally liked, they will be done. Now, that said, I think it's the 8th one will be the next main entry, and I did see rumors a while ago that it's supposed to be like a pretty big sort of diversion or from the formula. So maybe they're going to innovate a bit more there. Anyway, there you go. That's what's up there. Next up, though, a very dangerous story indeed. So I'm sure you've all heard of the world's most dangerous platform used by revolutionaries and just terrible people. Animal Crossing, New Horizons, very, very, very dangerous game. And that's why, thankfully, it is being taken down somewhere. Okay, here's the situation. It was causing a stir online because a number of pro-Hong Kong's, or pro-freedom, right, demonstrators began to use the game to protest, okay? Now, their actions may not have gone unnoticed because over the weekend, what happened? Well, the game was pulled from 2 major Chinese online retailers. New Horizons has not been officially released in China, so people who wanted that game, well, they had to rely on those marketplaces to get imported copies of it. Nonetheless, though, the game does remain incredibly popular among Chinese players. Now, that said, I should say, like, we gotta emphasize here, at this point, there is not a confirmed link between it being pulled from the stores and those HK protests. Instead, Reuters have reported that there is no indication whether the game's removal was a directive from China's content regulator or a voluntary act by a politically sensitive e-commerce platform. So, yes, it may definitely not be the case, but it definitely looks like it's the case to me. I think what's very likely, though, that would happen here is that it's just because it's user-generated content. There's no free speech over there because the government are terrified about people talking. So user-generated content that needs to have robust moderation so that censorship can be applied. How horrible. This is very likely why it was pulled, and realistically speaking, the sharing of user content, that would need to be removed from Animal Crossing, or they would need to work out just a little bit of how it could be, overlooked by a censor. Hey, G, just, thinking about this story, is there anything you lads are scared of people saying? Maybe something in Hong Kong, maybe something one of your northern sort of provinces? I don't know. Well, anyway, now that I've said that, I suppose I doubt my game studio's content's going to be approved there. So there goes some potential future beans, but you know what? I'd rather have principles. The next up, a quick bit on Warzone. It's hit 50 million in its first month, which pretty much has it right up there with Apex, which essentially means that, yep, there is another proper entry in that market. The COD franchise is going pretty big, and we're just going to have to see, right, in that battle, who will win. So that's definitely something to keep track of. Then next up, some very good news for, well, me and my fellow Half-Life people. The ending of Alex, no spoilers, opened up the door to just a lot of potential stories. A lot of people are excited, myself included, for what that could mean. And we've just had a little bit of a tidbit from Valve where one of their writers, Jay Pinkerton, told Polygon that they don't have a concrete 300-page manual of where the game goes after this, but that Valve are keen to explore life beyond Alex, and I certainly am too. Half-Life 1 was a core childhood game for me, and yeah, seeing more of that, very excited indeed. Now, speaking of Valve, there's another final interesting thing to end today's episode. It looks like they've not given up on the Steam controller just yet. There's a new patent filing that basically suggests a new, more customizable version where, right, essentially the haptic sort of touchpads for your thumbs, you'd be able to replace those with just a regular stick. I think that'd be pretty interesting. Those touchpads, it was weird. I didn't really like using them for games, but I thought that they had some interesting use cases, and certainly the haptics were very good. Something that we then saw be translated into the Vive, and I guess later on into, well, just basically the Vive's sort of thumb controllers, they had pretty nice haptics in them, which really helped it out. So you could see that Valve just had a little bit of expertise there and how that was implemented. Definitely interesting things. I'd say this, do Valve always get it right? No, I don't think so. But they generally are informed by, I think, interesting ideas and a direction that most other companies don't follow. And that's why I think as a company, yeah, I'm generally pretty darn interested in seeing what they're up to. So there you go. That is it for today's video. We've got ESRB, Resident Evil, Fallout, Valorant, Riot being a little bit creepy, and of course, Animal Crossing. Most dangerous game in history, apparently. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know what you thought about the topics down below. And with that, I'll see you next time.